Yeah, so we have quite a few. I mean, we have our shared transition ministry specialists here on this forum, and so that's all a part of our conversation. Our effort. I mean, last time we talked about how effective are we as an institution in terms of really supporting the viability, the sustainability of our churches, and while you folks are certainly dedicated to help midwife as well as hospice, aspects of the community that you're working with. It's you're still kind of stuck in the old minister-centric practice, and that's hard to kind of have a cultural shift that means that history doesn't repeat itself. And so what I've noticed in all the work that I've done, and I sat down and wrote down all the churches I've been at, over 300, and in all the ways in which I poured my heart and soul in trying to make a difference in terms of helping churches kind of get over it or get past their stuff, they've all reverted in some fashion back to just what is the kind of typical minister-centric pastor-flock dynamic, with all of its ups and downs, and so that's sort of what my concern is that we have yet to kind of be in a denominational conversation about our funding crisis. I mean, we're kind of all trying to be really positive and drill down even harder on our spiritual practice, but I think our context for how we're funding our churches is part of the problem. And until we have a kind of more universal intentionality around really cultivating the value systems associated with helping people transition into greater ownership, and until we help leaders learn how to partner with the community as opposed to being in protector roles, it's going to be hard to move the needle in terms of our denomination. And I'm also concerned that there's I don't know. I'm just talking. I don't know if you guys have concerns. Let's talk about what might be a concern that we can kind of generate a sense of how our evolutionary efforts can make a difference.
So, yeah, as a transitional consultant out there in the wild, I've gotten 2 more calls probably this week on ministries that are really failing and that I haven't worked with, but they're ready to close the doors, and they're asking for, what should we do? How do we save ourselves? And of course, it's way too late at this point, and yet there has to be some sort of support, for them. And of course, I don't think there's anything wrong with hospicing the old paradigm, and that's going to have to happen. Those ministries that are dying off, any organization that's dying off, and that's not shifting to the new paradigm, is going to fall away. And so I can't be upset about that. I can't be sad about that, but just support them in their disillusion, and not try to, let's do one last ditch effort so that we could now, instead of a church, now will be a study group. So I think probably the kindest thing is really to support them in dissolving and continue to move them into this integral mission-centric. But I'm not really sure how to do that. So I keep telling people to come see you guys.
So I recently also had a conversation with a minister who is in a ministry that's failing, and disillusion is the question. And I asked the minister, I said, just think about all the people who you see there, and could you imagine if they were doing what they could do with respect to what the need is, that there would be enough? And the minister commented, yes, of course. And so herein lies the dilemma, and that is when people are modulated by a sense of not enough, and it's at that place of we need to get more in order to feel like we're successful. When we actually examine where people are at, it's really less about there being the capacity to fund something. It's more about there lacks the capacity to have a vision for what can happen when people go into the dimension of ownership and really valuing what could happen when we decide to create something together that lives, independent of, the self-imposed limitations that we have on what's not happening in the outer. So it's almost like there's aspects of what's happening in terms of the entropy or the decline or what's kind of dying is that there's a lot of tired ministries out there.
Yeah.
A lot of stressed ministries out there. Mm-hmm. And you probably have people in your own ministry that get sick and move on because that's sort of their way out. And it's not to say that that's what's going on with everybody, but for some of those churches that you're talking about, it is necessarily probably the right thing to do for them to kind of let it all go, because it's not until we have the statistics that are really going to help people understand what's actually happening that people are going to be more motivated to kind of try to look for a fix that's not about trying to do more of the same thing, but evolving us into a different ministry practice.
If I could add that it has to start with the leadership, because that's the one thing I've learned over the 6 years, is that when I'm feeling like I'm not enough or it's not enough or how are we ever going to pay those bills, that is really adding to the problem. And it doesn't mean you stick your head in the sand and pretend that all's well when that's the double vision part of it. We see the dire straits or whatever, and at the same time we have to buy into and really live this. When we live it as leaders, as soon as the first board that we got to, when we got together and the first board all went into agreement on ownership and automatic giving, and you could feel the shift. It started there. It's been blossoming, but it's no quick fix, and it really takes a lot of internal introspection or watchfulness as to any time I'm showing up with less than, and it mirrors. I mean, we know how that works, and so there's a lot to it, to hold the reins, to hold the vision, and to trust, and to have faith, and to walk the walk. It takes some guts, I'll tell you, but it works, and I think that's the key. So that's all.
Go ahead, Denise.
But I noticed, and you had mentioned this earlier too, Gary, about partnerships in the community, and that one thing that I notice as I come in after ministers leave is they're not always partners in the community, that they somehow can separate themselves as a different entity, so that the budget, you need to increase my salary because I'm worth this amount, versus let's look at what we really want to create, and I'm a part of that as the minister, and then to reevaluate that every year. And so I have seen, churches just use up all of their resources to pay this minister because they so deserve to be paid what they are. And then the minister leaves and there's no assets left. So there's a partnership that is necessary as leaders as well as congregants.
Right. So this brings up a really good point, Denise, and I haven't spoken to this, I don't think. And that is, right now in these times, there's what I call a reckoning that has to occur for churches in order to kind of move forward, especially with the new funding model. For instance, the new funding model, or the spiritual cooperative, this idea of people doing what they can do, won't work if people live in the perception that the minister's making too much money, or the church has expenses beyond its means. So for most organizations, most established organizations that are in decline, there has to be some kind of reckoning, a reconciliation between the reality of what is the income of the church and the historical context of where people are in the current funding of the positions. So for instance, it's highly likely that most paid clergy are making more money than the churches can afford by virtue of the decline in support, not necessarily decline in their worth or what they provide. It's harder for churches that are in tremendous decline to really legitimize paying a minister more than what is feasible or practical in the context of the viability of the organization. So these are complexities in the whole funding kind of dynamic, and that is, if there's a church that has a financial kind of imbalance, either associated with someone being paid more than is customary or practical, or there being some kind of dimension of the church that is out of integrity, all of those things have to be kind of reckoned with before everybody can say, okay, the expenses of the ministry are legitimate, and then therefore, as owners, we should own all of it. And so that's an important step that I haven't really talked about, because a lot of church decline, there's also a lot of baggage associated with trust issues and money issues, and so it becomes even harder to really implement some of these mission-centric imperatives that have to do with retooling how we fund the organization, until there is a kind of real reality check with respect to the money that's there and the salaries that are paid and the expenses that are a part of what are the obligations of the church. So that sometimes is an issue that has to be sorted out.
If you could speak more to that reconciliation process, and if it's germane, use your example of being there in Spokane and what you did to do that reconciliation.
Well, so for us, our reconciliation process was they were in the red, and so it was a matter of whenever you're not in the black and you're in the red, you're not taking in as much money. The first thing you try to do is you try to eliminate your expenses or reduce your expenses. And so in the course of our time, we have been able to reduce our expenses till sufficiently each year through attrition and through the shifts in our operations to where now we have, just this first year, we've been in the black. And so for us, the reckoning has been to have a budget that reflects the bare necessities of our operational effort. There's nothing extra in terms of fluff or benefits, and so everybody sees that there's no place where we're spending money that we shouldn't. No one has an issue with anybody's salary. Everybody sees the budget and knows that it's accurate, and that's what we have to fund. So, but for my other clients, that was not the case. So, for instance, when there's a significant deficit, and then there's also a large group, or at least a significant group, that is withholding funds because of past issues with the leadership and their calls for transparency and for more accountability, have created a kind of layer of complexity and drama that I have to kind of manage in order for us to kind of get at a reckoning that works for all parties involved. Because part of what happens is that a minister who's often perceived to be paid too much has had a history of trying to be paid what they're worth, and then finally gets that, and then the bottom falls out from underneath them in terms of the economy, and then now they're now people are trying to grab at what's the low-hanging fruit for reducing expenses, and that's usually the salaries. So for you, for instance, David, reconciliation has to do with making sure that everybody values and appreciates what all the entire effort is. So long as you know that the minister's role is not over extravagant with respect to what your income is and what the dynamics of ministry dictate because of these times and your circumstances. So long as there's no excess with respect to aspects of the operational aspects of the church that are more indulgent than really practical or feasible. And so those kinds of things are a reckoning. Now there are other reckonings that have to do with how people are in relationship with each other. In other words, their well-being and their integrity and their maturity. So that's another kind of reckoning, having a community recognize that their victim behavior no longer serves the greater good. That's also reckoning that has to take place. And that's the challenge, because a lot of what a minister-centric ministry kind of enables is victim behavior. We can have an excuse for being the way we are because of the evidence that we've gathered, and we have no one to blame us because we all know what it feels like if we had the very experience. And yet, when we recognize that we teach, there's nothing known against us. The victim is simply, behavior that doesn't serve us. It's hard to move the community whose victim behavior is unconscious and lives in the ways in which people manage their comforts or their discomforts, their disappointments, their the emotional side of things is also a dimension that has to be reconciled if we're going to evolve the church into greater sustainability.
Gary, we have a question. When you say we have 23 more Easters.
Oh yeah.
Where does that come from again?
Okay, so if you think about the traditionals who are, in their upper 70s now, they have 10 more years left, and then they're going to be at 80s and 90s, and they're just not going to have the same kind of engagement. And now us baby boomers, in 23 years, I'll be 90 years old or 91, I'm not going to be involved either. And so the 23 years is, and this is not my calculation, this is another denomination's calculation, that once you lose the traditionals and the baby boomers from the revenue stream, absent of there being no viable, real funding strategy, it's done. That's what the denominational leaders are kind of seeing. And there's a scramble for, in a number of different ways. It's like there are probably other. I have no doubt that there are other people trying to figure this stuff out other than us. And in other denominations, they're faced with the same things. And so there are people trying different things out. What if we didn't have church? What if we have centers where the smallest aspect of the center was the Sunday worship experience? And how can we create a transformative organization built around a broader scope of how we might engage people's interest in creating an organization around supporting their transformational journey? So there are folks trying different things, and I'm focused on congregational ministry and trying to evolve those mission-centric ministries that have the capacity to manage the evolutionary process. So not all churches are up for the journey. And not all ministers and not all ministry leaders are up for the journey. It takes a certain resilience and energy to kind of be up for it. And there are churches or colleagues that we have that do have that kind of energy and are, you know, are interested in making a difference. But for the most part, I think, you know, it's like last we had our annual membership meeting. We looked around and I said, anybody under 50 here? And only 3 people stood up, you know, and out of the 60 other people, you know, everybody's old. And so when we go to convention, we'll see the same kind of phenomenon. There's not going to be a large percentage of folks that are in the demographic that we have to be cultivating. You know, Jane and I, we go to these Dr. Joe Dispenza week-long meditation retreats. And if you ever go and in these retreats, there's 700 to 1,000 people sitting in meditation. And the majority of those folks are in their 30s and 40s. And Jane and I think, well, this should be our congregation. This should be the energy that it should be a no-brainer. This should be the community that finds us, but we're not trying to even cultivate that dimension, or at least it doesn't seem so. I mean, I think Jane and I are now recognizing that we can kind of do some of the same things that Dr. Joe does and really be attracting some of this younger demographic. We're starting next Monday Morning with Dr. Joe meditation group, because
Morning Joe.
Morning Joe, there you go. Anyway, so there's things that I think that we can do to kind of cultivate this demographic that doesn't have the expiration date that the traditionalists and baby boomers have. But the challenge will be to get the funding from this demographic, and that's sort of what I'm trying to work on. You know, it's the new funding model is for the new community that has to sustain us in the long haul. And anyway.
So I have something as well.
Yep.
So if I could just also add, I'm starting something tomorrow, actually, we begin. It's a monthly gathering called Islands of Sanity. And this is taken from Meg Wheatley's latest work, where it's about creating places of compassion and kindness and caring that is going to change, sort of move into a new paradigm of living. That's the idea behind it. And just to invite people together to explore what that's like. And so it's a mix of all the different integral work that's being done. I've been taking little pieces from all over the place. But really what I'm getting is that this is a gathering of people who want to see how they can make a difference in the world, how our community can make a difference in the world. Very, very involved in that, very committed to that, but not really knowing what's next. And so the prerequisite for coming to this was that you had to have done the Q process, and you had to have watched my Evolving Paradigms video or seen it live, where it's about spiral dynamics and the new kind of paradigm coming. And so everybody that's coming has seen those things or been to the former things I did and has done the Q process. And we're going to do both. We're going to be doing the inner work as well as the outer work, and really working on changing our consciousness to where the things that we want to see change, for instance, homelessness, moving our consciousness to a place where homelessness is not possible, you know. So we're really diving into this, like, let's put these principles into practice. Let's try this stuff. Let's make it happen. And I don't know where it's going, and I'm just one of the people there. I'm not pretending to be any great leader of anything, but I'm willing to be the one to explore this with people and to look at what do we need to do? How can we do it? Let's practice. Let's share the journey. And so that's what I'm finding, is that people want this. They want to see how they can make a difference in the world. And I would say, if we want to attract millennials and, you know, that age group, that is where we connect with them, is that they really get that they need to change the world, or that things need to change, and let's get on with it, you know. And so that's what I'm doing, and I'll keep you posted as to how it's going, because I'm real excited about it, and I'm excited about the people that have signed up. They're all really ready to dive in. So,
Gosh, I'm excited about that, Jane, because my next question was, so what's one thing we could do? I get asked all the time in these churches, so what can we do to attract the younger people, the millennials? What can we do to shift and change? And I don't know if it's any one thing, but I love hearing that, you know, the new generation, the millennials, they're very interested in how to contribute to make this world a better place, and not so much that we have this fabulous Sunday service, which is what our focus has been as the baby boomers. And I totally agree with you, Gary. Our traditionals and baby boomers are sort of moving out, and if we don't change the demographics, we're going to die pretty soon, probably sooner than 5 years. But you say we got at least 5 years, which is good. But this is helpful, what we're talking about right here. This is helpful. We need to change the culture. We need to change the consciousness, but there is things to do. So this monthly gatherings of Islands of Sanity, I love this idea, Jen. So keep me informed.
So one of the things that we also mentioned, that we've done a process called Conscious Conversations. And that was a process where we interviewed everybody in the church. We interviewed over 130 people, which is less than what we wanted. Our goal was 150 out of our almost 200 people. But anyway, the way it played out in terms of who got interviewed, that there were some of the millennials in that group, but not a lot. But the point I'm trying to make is that in that survey, we had people say they loved the music, and then we had people say they wish the music was different. And so herein lies the kind of conundrum, and that is the things that would bring millennials into an engagement would be not appealing to the established core of the community. You know, we had somebody want to bring back the Lord's Prayer, and you know, and so you know, that it's out there, you know, and so there's a lot of churches that are really in established ways that aren't, you know, one young couple would come and then they would be the only ones, and you know, I that was my first experience in a Unity church. I walked in when I was 20 years old, and there was all these old people, you know, 40, 50-year-olds, you know. but the idea is that we really need that demographic to cultivate itself, and so part of what Jane and I are doing is we've got a group of 40-ish, 50-ish folks that are really kind of what we call our Middle Earth, that we're trying to really recruit and cultivate to help us expand our reach. So anyway, that's all right. Joanne, do you have a question?
Well, I just want to say that one of our other perceived stories could be that we believe people want to evolve, because I've found that that's not technically the case. You know, especially in the Panama City scenario recently. Because, you know, we went through all of the basic steps, and I was talking to you, and we were, you know, but the leadership, you know, the leadership that hired me was totally different from the leadership that, what they say and what they did were totally opposite. And right. There was no rectifying that, as much as I tried, and as chaotic as that seemed to be, you know. I mean, we would discuss one thing at a board meeting, and then in front of the congregation, out of their mouths would be something totally different, which I was stunned a lot of the time at public meetings. So small ministry, how do you rectify the leadership not wanting to be trained or, you know, step up to learn a new way, because the small churches, I think, are just stuck in the past, you know.
Yeah, it's sort of the unintended consequence of our current ministry practice is that the smaller churches tend to become encapsulated within their own structures of knowing, and therefore their experience, their sense of what they bring to the effort of ministry lives in the context of their past. And you're right insofar as saying that a lot of church leaders don't know that they're stuck in victim or stuck in a kind of mindset that is counter to us evolving our churches. So part of the challenge is that, you know, when I coach, if I have a chance to coach colleagues as they're in the process of evaluating whether or not this is a fit, is you have to sort of kind of test the waters to see if they're really ready to do the deeper inner work. And I've had colleagues who've had the leaders say, "Oh yeah, we've done shadow work and all that kind of stuff," but it's just in word only, as opposed to actually in the effort. So part of it is us getting better at supporting you when you're looking for the next opportunity, to kind of equip you with a means by which you can kind of evaluate the church's culture to see if it's a good fit. Is I've created a process many years ago that I've given to the Unity Worldwide, but no one's done a thing with it, and because of bandwidth. So the process enables the congregation to fill out a questionnaire that helps you map the culture of ownership and the cultural demographic, the cultural dimensions of the church, to see if it's a good fit. And so, for instance, wouldn't you like to know the one thing that you should not change, that if you change, it's going to be a deal breaker for individuals in the church, and what that one thing is? So there are questions that we don't ask in our kind of process of candidating, because our systems really don't have a kind of effort around determining whether or not it's a cultural fit. It's more of a dating game, whether or not we like or feel empowered or connected and feel like there's a chance that we can make a difference. And we always tell everybody what we want them to hear so that we're liked and so that we get the job, and then we deal with the realities of it later on. So for instance, when I sent the survey here to Spokane, asking that they complete the survey, I gave the survey results to all the other candidating ministers who were candidating for a Unity Spiritual Center in Spokane, so they would have the same information that I had. And from the information that I received from the survey, I discovered that the minister was not the primary caregiver, which was very unusual. When asked the question, who in the ministry has supported you in your time of need, the minister was not selected the most. It was not the most frequently selected, which is unusual. And interestingly enough, I found out that this is really indicative of a church that has had a rich history. So our church is over 105 years old, and it has had dozens and dozens and dozens of ministers. And so the church, the community here, the average person who participated in the conscious conversation has been at the church 17 years or more. So the majority of our folks have been in the church have lived through the lifespan of 5-6 ministers, some of them. And so they just don't get used to ministers as being the source of their pastoral care. They rely upon each other. And so they're more focused to look towards each other to care for one another, and less towards the minister. And to me, that was an interesting phenomenon that was a green flag. Because, you know, when Jane and I were candidating, you know, we had to differentiate our two roles, because I'm not the pastoral type. I don't have that gift. Jane does. And it turned out that we've been able to successfully manage the pastoral dimension of the church primarily with chaplains. And that becomes a basis of one more layer of removing the minister from having to hold down that dimension of the church. So can you imagine having a church where the pastoral care dimension runs independent of the ministers? That's a pretty cool thing.
So if I could add,
Yes.
Ministers still own the spiritual counseling aspect, although we have shifted much more to debriefing worksheets with people than spiritual counseling. Now, if somebody has a severe loss or they have a real need, absolutely we do spiritual counseling. But by far the majority of people that come to see us now bring a worksheet, and we help them debrief it, and that's become a big part of it. But we've also expanded the chaplain program so that they are praying with people after church. They're also holding the service in prayer. So they're holding space. And one chaplain now is every service, that's all they're doing. They have a special little chair, chaplain chair they sit in, and they hold the whole thing in prayer the whole time. And then the other two or one, depending on which service, does the after church praying. We also have them visit people in the hospital, and we did a training around that about what that means and how to do it. And we have a prayer shawl ministry that is, they take the prayer shawls when they go. They'll visit shut-ins, and they're also hosting prayer vigils when we have special events like Good Friday or World Day of Prayer. We do a prayer vigil and a labyrinth walk, and they host that. And they Easter morning we have a sunrise service, and then the chaplains provide breakfast for everybody. And so their role has expanded pretty significantly over the years, and we have people filling in forms for people to go visit in the hospital. And so I still visit people in the hospital, certainly, and I still go to visit shut-ins, but the majority of that is being done by our chaplains, and they're very good at it. They're getting better. We just trained a new batch. We have 19 prayer chaplains now, and it just keeps on growing. And the more the pastoral needs of that type are being met by the community, the more mission-centric we become. I'll tell you that. And it's so inspiring to me. I'm so excited about this, about how it's growing, and how much people want to step into those roles and do that work. So very exciting.
So another thing to consider when we're talking about the challenge of attracting millennials is, of course, they have families. And so part of the challenge in our ministry is that the smaller churches have increasingly more challenges with creating a viable youth ministry program, independent of getting the parents to have to be the youth program for their kids. And so part of the challenge is that how can you grow that demographic and also support their families when that's a need. In our church, we often have to have a minimum of 10 to 20 adults to manage just the young people's kids. And our Jackie Green, who is our youth and family minister, she does a great job of making sure that the parents of these kids do involve themselves in some form of meaningful service. All right, see you later, Denise. And so part of the effort is creating a culture that can cultivate and grow a youth ministry that can be a basis of attracting those younger folks who need that if they're to engage in deeper ways in the life of the organization.